So my name is Ian Miers. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland, and more relevantly for this audience, one of the inventors of Zcash and Zexi, which are the protocols that underpin much of the privacy-preserving payment systems we have today. And this is a talk on two things. One of them is some recent work my lab has produced on privacy-preserving moderation systems. And the second one is this question of how do we deal with accountability and privacy in cryptocurrency, right? Doing both of these. So cryptocurrency now has this privacy paradox, right? We know, it's been about 15 years of doing this, we know that public blockchains have a privacy problem. This is not a theoretical question now. It is a marketing thing for a number of companies and actually just really a problem, right? We also weirdly now know how to solve these problems. We know how to build private solutions. These are the kind of things that are built into Zcash, Railgun, Pay, Tornado Cash, right? And we even weirdly know how to get some major cryptocurrency exchanges to accept dealing with these, which have legitimate KYC AML programs. So at some level, the answer of how do we have accountability in cryptocurrency and privacy is you build a private payment system and you take the existing KYC AML protocols we have for money, cash, and apply them. And this literally does work. It is out there. But in the same 15 years that this has turned out to work, the rest of cryptocurrency has really gotten sort of built up on let's do transaction graph analysis. And it's come to be a sort of load-bearing thing for detecting stolen funds, deciding how to freeze payments, this is particularly relevant for stablecoins, and for doing things like detecting suspicious transactions and flagging someone if, hey, you know what, you're about to get scammed. And all this is because you have a public transaction graph. So like, Bitcoin is Twitter for your bank account, all this stuff is public. We know how to solve that, but it turns out people also use that as features. So what do we do about this? All right? The obvious solution is, in the case of privacy-preserving systems, view keys. Right? We have gone to this notion of let's let the good guys have access to the transaction graph and do all the analytics they have, but somehow hide it from the bad guys. And this has become a bit of a meme in certain policy circles. Right? That is not the only idea, but they're all sort of the same. Right? If you look at a number of the roll-ups that are being built, private blockchain systems using TEs, they all have this undermining point of we don't make the data public, we let the good guys see it, but we don't let the bad guys see it. And therefore, we can do whatever kind of fraud analytics we want, whatever kind of anti-money laundering preventions. And this is like a reasonable idea. There are even some proposals to secure this with MPC, FHA, and TEs. Though I have some bad news for you there. If you've been watching how these bridge hacks have happened, the notion of, hey, we're going to have 5 computers securing something, and surely someone can hack 1 computer but not 5, that was never going to work, and now we know it's not going to work. So you got a security problem there. But in general, I don't blame people for building this. This is sort of the easy solution to a problem that you have to solve to get product market fit. There are companies I'm advising that actually have this solution deployed, right? Aleo has a version of USDC on its private blockchain with a view key in it, right? Fine. There's just one problem. If we deploy these things, in like 5 years, one of these things is going to get breached because there are a number of people who want to get access to databases of sensitive information. Right? Intelligence services, foreign intelligence services, target surveillance infrastructure. Right? The Wall Street Journal reported in 2024 that Salt Typhoon, is the name for an operation, had breached the wiretap systems at AT&T, Verizon, and a number of other places that aren't public yet. That's not even the first time. This also happened to Google in 2010 in Operation Aurora. Right? And it's not just surveillance data. These kind of adversaries also go out after financial and personal information. Right? In 2017, the Equifax credit reporting system was breached and exposed 147 million records. Right? And if you're wondering, well, why would a foreign intelligence service want access to credit reports? Well, the other thing, a different unit that the same country allegedly did, was got their hands on the security clearance databases for the United States intelligence community. This was the OPM breach. And so now you have financial information of people with credit data problems and a list of people with security clearances. You can see why this data might be of some use to an intelligence service. But if that's too much of a James Bond thing for you, you don't even need to have nation-state level resources to do this, right? In 2014, there was a breach of JP Morgan for used for doing cybercrime stuff. In fact, the US attorney at the time described it as securities fraud on cyber steroids, right? They got access to a bunch of data on people's profiles, preferences, and money and used it to direct scams and pump and dump operations. This, by the way, had nothing to do with, well, mostly nothing to do with cryptocurrency. And more recently, in 2026, there were reports that a tax official sold crypto investor profiles to organized crime in France, right? There's like actual reporting about this. And so this data, like, is going to get got. And, like, you don't even necessarily need hackers to go after it, right? Like, that's insiders getting co-opted. So we need a better solution, right? And so this talk is going to cover that in two different parts. The first one of this is going to talk about work that my group had at Usenix Security last year. It says ZK Promises. It works on anonymous moderation, reputation, and blocking from anonymous credentials. This is basically taking the work we did for privacy-preserving smart contracts, adding some features on it, and using it for a totally different setting, right? It gives you accountability for anonymous accounts, and it gives you this kind of programmable and configurable system. However, there's a problem with this. This doesn't work for cryptocurrency. You actually can't use it for it, and I'm gonna have to give you a whole explanation involving a different motivation when I go over these slides. Because in cryptocurrency, people matter, but the money can move around. And so what I want to talk about briefly at the end of this is a second paper that is not up yet, but should be in the next month and a half from my group on shadow graphs, which is the promise of identifying risky transactions without de-anonymization. So this is taking these techniques and applying them to actual cryptocurrency accounts and trying to do it in a way that minimizes leakage and doesn't create a view key. So first part, right? How do we get accountability for an anonymous account, right? Forget cryptocurrency specifically, just think about this generically. Like, this seems somewhat impossible. You have someone who's completely anonymous, but you want to hold them accountable. So to give you a concrete scenario, let's say Wikipedia wants to support anonymous edits, right? This is, by the way, a real thing. Like, there have been Wikipedia editors who have been arrested for, like, making edits of, say, the Wikipedia page of their king. And so you might want anonymity there. So Wikipedia wants to do this. They want to allow people to have anonymous accounts. That's easy enough to do. We know how to do this with anonymous credentials. But the problem is people are trolls. Right? Someone's going to vandalize the Wikipedia page of whoever and rickroll everybody. And so Wikipedia needs to retain the ability to block that person and prevent them from making more edits, right? They can't get this one undone, but they want to be able to prevent you from doing anything further. So this is this paradox. How do you have this person who's completely anonymous but hold them accountable? So for now, I want you to think about this from the following a little weird model. Let's assume people are going to honestly follow whatever protocol we describe, whatever code we write down for run, but they're going to try to vandalize stuff anyway. So we're going to say they are honest but obnoxious. And then later, we're going to use cryptography, spoilers, the stuff we did from Zcash and Zexy, to fix this. So that's the way you want to think about this, right? So the way this works is when someone makes a post, an edit, whatever their action is, they associate each one of those with a random tag, right? Completely random identifier. And each edit you make is associated with that. And because these are random, they're completely unlinkable. They have nothing about you. They're completely anonymous. Right? And so the server, however, can use that tag to ban you. Right? So the way this works is if I go make an edit to Wikipedia and I rickroll everybody, server moderators find it. They find it later, right? It's not I'm still in a session, I still have it live. They find it like a week later, 24 hours later, something like that. They can take that random identifier and they post it on a block list, on a bulletin board on the server. And then we are going to have the clients honestly loop through every single tag they've produced and check if it's in that block list. And so if I get banned for my rickrolling people at it, then that ban is going to prevent me from going through and running this because that check will fail, and I will not be able to make a second edit. You have succeeded in banning me. Right? This means the client needs to be able to store and track the tags they've made. So we're going to have an actual like object associated with it where the client just stores that. And so now, since you start thinking about the client having state, well, let's just go a bit further. Let's actually have the client just contain arbitrary state. And so now, when I post one of these callbacks, one of these random tags, doesn't have to just be ban, right? It can actually be an arbitrary function that runs arbitrary arguments the server has specified, right? You agree to this in advance, but you can have whatever you want, right? So a simple one is set the client state to banned because you didn't like them. But you could also have a system where they did downvotes, right? Or 3 strikes and bans you, or any other complicated logic. You can go in here. The entire point is that the client is going to have to process this data and actually do whatever it is you told them to do. Again, the client is completely anonymous here, right? Because they're just looping through, looking at these random identifiers and going, hey, does that apply to me? Okay, if it does, I need to execute the arguments that are associated with that callback. So what's the obvious problem here, right? Well, this works if the client's is honest. But if you're a dishonest client and you get downvoted by 5 points for making a bad edit to Wikipedia, are you really going to process that downvote? No, you're going to pretend it never happened, right? And so we need to somehow get to a malicious security here. And this means we need to force clients to execute state transition logic even if they don't want to. We need to make sure they can't roll back and pretend they never did something. We need to make sure they can't skip anything, right? We need to make sure they properly process all of this. And we need to do all of this while keeping the client anonymous, right? We need to hide who's doing this update, who it is, what state they're touching. And this, particularly to this audience, should look slightly familiar to you because it actually looks like exactly what the problem you have to do in Zcash, right? Or Zexi if you're building smart contracts. And the thing here is snarks are not enough. ZK proofs are not enough, right? This idea actually for doing random accountability just for banning is old. It dates back to 2007 and 2008. And the problem with these techniques is you don't get to keep state. You don't give the description of the problem I've given you here where I said we can have the client keep track of everything that they've done, right? Instead, you just have to do something very complicated, like say take the entire list of ban events and make the client for every single one of them prove whether it pertained to them or not. That's a proof that's linear in the size of the ban list. You could do some other tricks, but it really doesn't work very well. If, on the other hand, you actually have the state keeping solution, way to keep state, right, the techniques that Zcash and Zexi pioneered anonymously, then you could actually force dishonest clients to follow the rules that I just described. You could actually get this toy example I gave you to work with really not that much effort, right? You can get the client to keep state. And the state here is much more general than what we had in Zcash, what was an account balance, right? Their client has like $20, you need to make sure they can't pay someone $5 and then roll back to the state where they have 20 and get another free $5. Here, it's a more complicated arbitrary thing about what you've done, what your moderation history is, but it's the same basic idea. And one point I'd like to make here is this gives you a very powerful tool for building privacy-preserving protocols, including identity and reputation systems. And in ZK Promises, we sort of referred to this as the ZK object model. Not because it was new, but because that was a useful view of it that maybe you didn't want to go stare through the depths of Zerocash, the paper, or Zexi, the other paper, with a bunch of other extraneous stuff on it, and you want to look at just the very pure version of it, right? So if you haven't seen this before, or if you were confused by it, the way this works, right, in all of these systems, is effectively you're going to have an anonymous user and some server or blockchain, it actually doesn't matter which, and they are going to run the following thing basically in a loop for every time they do something, which is they're going to prove that they have an authenticated commitment to their state. This can either be in a signature or in a Merkle tree. They're going to open that commitment, right? They're going to run some state transition on that state, right? I have this in object notation here. You can do it however you want. They're going to sample a new nullifier, right? Because they have to prevent replays, and they're going to reveal the current nullifier associated with their state. This is what prevents you from doing replays or double spins, right? And then you send this to the server or the blockchain checks the proof, checks that the nullifier is not spent, adds it to the list, signs a new state, returns a new signature. This is the same technique that underpins Zcash, Zexi, Aleo, Aztec, all of these, a core basic idea. There's a bunch of other stuff on top of them, right? This is how you keep state in an anonymous system with ZK proofs, right? And this is fast, right? And you can run this in whatever you want. So when you do that, you get to go from this honest but obnoxious setting to one where you have to deal with dishonest. You can just deal with dishonest clients. So we have clients can anonymously proof statements about their state. They can modify it according to some program you've written, like a smart contract. And now we have asynchronous callbacks on it. So we can do privacy-preserving changes by third parties. This means the Wikipedia moderators can, for example, ban you, or downvote you, or put you in a timeout. And you could imagine applying this to any kind of other domains you want, right? This is, as I said, reasonably fast. So what if you try to apply this to cryptocurrency? What happens? Well, let's try to do this in the very simple setting, right? For those of you who are familiar with privacy pools, we don't have transactions in the pool. We just have deposit and withdrawal. It's a mix, right? And you want to be able to flag transactions that might be stolen that went into the pool before they come out. Users voluntarily proof this. So this is actually easy to do, right? You can have callbacks associated with the deposit. You wait for them to go through. And if I try to withdraw and someone's pulled that callback to mark my funds as suspect, then when I pull the funds out, they are marked as suspect. Right? This is not actually hard. This is actually pretty close to what privacy pools does. But this only works for simple deposits and withdrawals. Right? What happens if you try to allow privacy inside the pool, to allow transactions inside the pool, like the thing that, say, Zcash does? Right? Now you run into a problem because the money has moved. The person who deposited it in, right, may have paid someone else. So even if you have a callback that says, well, that guy stole my money, that callback only affects him. It doesn't affect the person he paid him to. So the very obvious thing that a thief who knows this system exists is going to do is he's not going to pay the money to himself. He's going to go through a cutout. And yeah, that cutout is going to get screwed by the callback, but the thief's going to keep his money, right? So this is a fundamental problem in trying to do these systems, right? And the current solution that's been proposed a couple of times to fix this is, well, let's just assign serial numbers to all of the dollars in the privacy pool and track them as they move through. And therefore, we know if a callback was associated with this deposit, if a flag was, we know what it is when it comes out the end. But this clearly doesn't have any privacy in it, right? Like if you have a unique identifier tracking all of your transactions that's recorded at every hop, that looks a lot like a blockchain. And that's back to the privacy problem we have. So the missing piece to solve this, given that you have the ability to do accountability for anonymous accounts, this is what we got from Zcash, is we need something that can follow the money, right? Cause these things to follow along as the money moves through the system, and we need to do it without a view key. And so this is work that's going to come out of my research group sometime soon. I want to say within the next month, but every time you say that, your grad students inevitably don't get the paper done in time, so let's call it 2 months. But it should be up within that amount of time. It's currently in submission. And Shadow Graphs solves this problem. The way it does it is it builds a encrypted routing network for forwarding callbacks. And the interesting thing here is the routing doesn't require a global view. It doesn't require a global view key. Every payment records just the encrypted next hop that's supposed to happen, right? And reports, right, callbacks to say, hey, this is a bad payment, this is suspicious, this should be frozen, whatever it is, follow it hop by hop. Each report only unlocks the next hop. So there's an obvious question here of, well, who's forwarding these things, right? It can't be the user, because if a thief just goes offline, they're not going to forward stuff to their accomplices, and they will deliberately go offline, right? ZK promises this technique for making people follow the rules by doing what you told them to do. It only works if they do a next step, if they execute the program. They always have the option to abort. So we can't do that. So we need to introduce third parties. And so in this paper, we introduce forwarding agents. Right? Every user has a distinct forwarding agent. They can have as many as they want. And these people are responsible only for forwarding reports. All right? That's sort of from first principles. We have to have that party. But have we just reinvented view keys? Right? I said there are multiple forwarding agents, so maybe it's slightly better. But like, you should be skeptical here, right? That sounds a lot like a transaction graph. The trick is that you can actually, if you're careful about this, minimize the leakage. Set it up so that after a report, after someone says, hey, this is stolen funds, or this is a suspect transaction, you only need to recover the next hop. You don't need to know the amounts, the addresses, the identities of people involved, right? But even this next hop, there's some structure there. So we don't want the forwarding agents to be able to see it on their own, right? We don't want them to say, oh, this is this path. If someone files a report, I know where it should go. So instead, we introduce this thing called zippered encryption. And in this, an agent can't open an edge in this shadow graph on their own. They need a key that's only associated with a report or callback that say these funds are stolen or suspect. Right? And so combined with that key, which only the person who sent the funds knows, and with the forwarding agent's key, they can decrypt and decrypt the next hop. But before that, the forwarding agent knows nothing. They are completely blind. They don't even know that this transaction is one they're responsible for. Right? And so that's a lot to take in. So I just want to leave you sort of with a visual on this. Standard transaction graph, Alice pays Dave $3. Bob pays Dave $2. Dave spends $5 to Freddie. Right? And then Charlie pays Dave another $1. In a normal blockchain, this is totally public. You can see everything. And we now know, after the 15 years of all of this, that this is not anonymous, even though these are pseudonyms in here. You can figure out what's going on, right? In Zcash, Zexi, Aleo, Aztec, et cetera, we remove all this data. But OK, what if we want to add some accountability? In shadow graphs, right, what happens is it's a ZK system. Your payments don't create a graph, but we are registering these edges. But they're all just encrypted under keys held by different parties, different forwarding agents, right? And so all you see is these random, unrelated edges that have no structure to them. And there's no data that's public at this point. Once Alice reports something, say that, hey, Bob scammed me, Charlie scammed me, you should mark this account as suspect, or hey, it's a stable coin, that was the North Koreans who stole my money, you should freeze these funds. These are both applications you could program. Now, when Alice makes the report, only the forwarding agent learns this next hop. Right? They learn the next thing it should go to, and they can forward this report along. And then that report becomes a callback in ZK promises for whoever's holding the money to currently process it. Right? So how do we enforce all of this, right? How do we create these edges in the network? Well, the answer to that is the ZK object model. We're doing the exact same setting that we did in ZK promises, but also using it to make these encrypted edges. This scales to large volumes of transactions. It takes less than 1 second to do this, right? Probably much less than 1 second when we fix out the right version of Poseidon we're doing. We have a prototype in this in NOR. Forwarding agents actually scale quite well. They only do work proportional to the number of reports, not the number of transactions in the system. They do have to do trial decryptions on those reports. And this sort of gives you a lot of interesting tools. It lets you do programmable policies, right? I've alluded to a couple here, but you can really do anything you want, controlling when edges get set in this graph, how long the edges are, who they are, and what you do with these reports or callbacks. You want to have some nonlinear reputation system, you can do that. You want to do freeze of funds, you can do that. You want to do privacy pools style, mark things so people can voluntarily disclose that they're not the bad guys, you can do that too. A particularly relevant policy here is that you can set when edges get added. So if you're trying to cover stolen funds, a reasonable thing to do would be to say, look, anytime you move money you got within the last 24 hours, you have to add an edge to the shadow graph. But if you've been held the money for 24 hours or a week or something, you don't. And this provides a very crucial privacy protection. Because, all the cryptography aside, the fundamental ability to freeze somebody's funds or mark it has a privacy problem. Let's say you're a democracy activist. You take donations on a pseudonymous account online, and then you deposit it under your actual name at an exchange. If the secret police in the country you're operating in send you a couple of payments, and then you deposit them, in a privacy-preserving system, that should be fine. In a system where you have some kind of reporting, accountability, freezing functionality, well, the secret police can abuse that to test if your funds are at that exchange. But on the other hand, if you limit this to 24 hours, well then, all you have to do as an activist is wait 24 hours and you'll be safe, versus someone who steals money, well, if they wait 24 hours, then their money gets frozen, right? So that's that, and I think at that point, I'll take questions if we have time.